I'm Tania Kazi. I'm a theorist in international relations. I have been interested in current affairs for a long time, and I have had the good fortune of having Mr. Deepak Chopra over here, whom I'm going to ask questions regarding the memo that he has addressed to President-elect Barack Obama. When you talk about this military retrenchment, these 9 ideas, these 9 points that you have, are we just focusing through these ideas on the symptom of the disease and not the root cause itself? Do you think in some ways President-elect Obama has to focus on the US foreign policy rather than just going in there and retrenching military activity?
Yeah, US foreign policy has been based on self-interest all along, which is how usually foreign policies are based. They're based on the self-interest of the country, and they are in the short term quite effective. I remember a few years ago when somebody asked a State Department person, you've abandoned Afghanistan, they were your best friends, you know, when you were fighting the Russians and the Soviet Union, and during the Cold War, they were your best friends. You abandoned them. And the State Department official responded by saying, we don't have friends, we only have interests. Well, that is how foreign policy officials are trained. Look after your interests. It's what is known as a reductionist short-term approach. And in the short term, it does work. But in the long term, it actually it aggravates the problem. Having abandoned the Afghanis, who had amazing training from the Americans, who were given weapons by the Americans, and then were left unto themselves, what was left behind was rage, abandonment, and weapons. Okay. In fact, I heard a Taliban leader being interviewed by my son once. You know, my son used to be a war correspondent, and he was in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and this Taliban leader said the US treated us like prostitutes. They used us, gave us a little money, and then they abandoned us. So I think US foreign policy has to now go to a new level where it's the interest of the world. It's like what's happening everywhere. You know, the ecology is the interest of the world. The economy is the interest of the world. We are being forced into that position. You cannot kill terrorists. I mean, you can kill terrorists, but you cannot kill an ideology that is born in a certain context. And that context has a historical perspective, a cultural perspective, an economic context, and has a lot to do with our own foreign policies.
So given that, you must feel relatively confident, especially when President-elect was in his, the campaign was going full-fledged, and the result of the election had not come out yet, and he kept talking about wanting to talk to Iran as opposed to threatening them or having the posture that the US has always had toward Iran, for instance. And his suggestion that we should talk and have bilateral discussion and dialogue would probably give you more confidence in the fact that he might be on the right track, which is why you...
There are certain principles that have been understood in recent times that should be actually be much more available to the person out there. If you want to resolve a conflict, here are things you should be willing to do. Number one, you should be willing to talk, but talk with respect, because the number one cause of rage in the world is lack of respect and belligerence and humiliation. Number two, in any conflict, you should realize that both parties feel injustice. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a conflict. The fact that there's a conflict, there are two parties that feel injustice. Number three, in any conflict, you should make room for humility, asking for forgiveness, and be willing to give forgiveness. Number four, you should refrain from belligerence, something that our current president is unable to do. I mean, he walks with belligerence, he talks with belligerence, he smirks with belligerence. Number five, you should understand that there is such a thing called emotional intelligence, that anybody can learn. You know, it means being in touch with your own feelings, it means in touch with the feelings of your adversaries, and it means managing relationship intelligently. Number 6, in any dialogue, there should be an understanding of other people's values, because they do have values. I was part of a scientific survey done by Gallup, and we surveyed the equivalent of 600 million Muslims in 10 countries. It wasn't a minor survey. We included Pakistan and Morocco and Saudi Arabia and Iran, Iraq, and we were very pleasantly surprised by the values that people have in these countries, that the vast majority of people are not terrorists or even moderates. The vast majority of people want the elderly to be treated with respect, want to help the poor, are interested in entrepreneurship, are interested in economic well-being, want to send their children to school. We don't even know those values. We stereotype everybody because of the popular media. So we need to understand each other's values. Of course, the other side needs to understand our values, and when you actually look at each other's values, you say they're the same. You know, our beliefs may divide us. Our beliefs, religious beliefs, usually tend to divide people, but the values unite them. So we need to bring that into discussion. At the same time, we need to understand that everybody comes from fear, that if you start to prove the other person wrong, which is what we do all the time in our foreign policy, these are simple principles that should become part of our discussion and should become part of our training of people when we train them as diplomats, but they're not yet.
As a matter of fact, this belligerence and this, one-upmanship has caused even the moderates across the world to take on a more extremist stance because they feel constantly victimized.
We need, as our foreign policy, to harness the help and creativity of the moderates by not alienating them, by making them part of the discussion. At the same time, the moderates have to start taking a stance, which they did. You know, something that happened which was very impressive in Mumbai is that the Muslim leaders in Mumbai and the Hindu leaders in Mumbai got together. And they said, we are not going to allow this to alienate us. In fact, the Muslim leaders went on record as saying that none of these terrorists will be buried in a Muslim cemetery. Now that was a huge statement coming from Muslim leaders, and a very responsible statement, made it almost impossible for the Hindu fundamentalists who would otherwise have reacted to do anything, because they were disarmed by this statement.
How do you think the US plays a role now, given what you suggested? How does the new president-elect, how should he focus on this conflagration that's constantly brewing between India and Pakistan, especially given the recent Mumbai?
I think the India-Pakistan situation is very complex, and I wish there was a very simple solution. There isn't. But a good start would be that President-elect Obama is tough with both sides. As I said earlier in a different interview, the US and India have come up with a nuclear deal. It's not a nuclear arms deal, it's a nuclear cooperation deal, but in the mind of the ordinary person, it doesn't make a difference. If you have nuclear technology, it could be used for weapons as well. This has obviously caused a lot of distress everywhere else, including India's neighbors in Pakistan. So this is an opportunity for Mr. Obama to use that as a lever to be tough on India and make sure that at no cost India will resort or even attempt a violent solution or an act of what they call retribution or react. At the same time, Mr. Obama has to be tough with Pakistan, in that if we know where these terrorists are trained, if we know where the money supply is coming from, Pakistan right now needs economic support from the United States, and that economic support should be aimed at creating a powerful economic Pakistan, not necessarily a powerful military Pakistan, because if you focus only on the military, you do it at the cost of everything else in development. So instead of right now the United States is giving a lot of military aid to Pakistan. By the way, it's also selling weapons to India. So the United States is selling weapons to both sides. In fact, I know of weapons manufacturers who are private companies from the United States. They go to India, make a good weapons deal, then they go to Dubai, rest for a few days, and then they go to Pakistan and make the same deal. So, while American companies are making a lot of money, they're basically giving weapons of mechanized death to both sides. They have to look at that honestly. Do we replace our military aid with economic aid? Do we put a stop to this weapons trading? Do we help with education and awareness? There's lots of things the United States can do on both sides.
Speaking of mechanized death, let's bring our attention to the Middle East. How do you feel about Mr. Obama's silence on the current Gaza-Israel crisis?
I would like to believe that Mr. Obama's silence is for the reasons he has explicitly stated, which is that there can only be one president at a time, and that he's using this time to really incubate and come up with the most creative and hopefully the toughest solution for this problem. And only America can do it right now. I think there is no question that Hamas is intent, at least they declare their intention, that they do not believe in the survival of Israel. So even though the other Arab surrounding states have acknowledged that Israel has a right to exist, they have not been very vocal about it. In fact, they have used the Palestinians as a football. The Palestinians are a miserable people. They have no homeland. They're extremely poor. Less than 1% of Arab money could take care of rebuilding Gaza, educating the people in Gaza, but they don't do it. And the Americans don't put any pressure on the Arab world to do that. At the same time, America has to be tougher on Israel. There's not any reason to attack these poor people, even though the terrorists are hiding among civilian populations over there to their advantage. There's, if you look at those pictures coming out from Gaza, they are horrendous. What's happening to the civilian population. But America can put pressure on both sides. America can tell Israel, stop it. Okay, you're using our weapons to do it. America can put pressure on the Arab world and say stop it.
But America is providing Israel the weapons.
America is providing everybody the weapons. Right. You see, our oil money goes to the Arabs who buy weapons too. I mean, and if they don't do it directly, which they do, they also, from Qatar and all these places, they do it in Pakistan, they do it in other countries. So, we are fueling all sides of the conflict, and it comes to ultimately greed. This is a very, very incendiary thing to say, that we are doing it. But most of us are not aware that we are funding all sides of the conflict. And we need to change that conversation. That, if America has been given this role of being the world leader, and if it wants to maintain that role of being the world leader, it may not. Because, America, if we don't watch out with what's happening on Wall Street and the economic corruption and the cronyism and the bureaucracy and the influence peddling and the power mongering that goes among the rich elite in America, if we don't watch out, America could be finished. The emerging economies right now are China and Southeast Asia, and to some extent India. And in the future of the world will be economic and cultural power, not military power, if we are to survive.
So we focus on trade and we focus on economic infrastructure
I think
and
that's
education.
the only thing, economic partnerships and peace economies. You know, you talk about Kashmir. I mean, it's such a hot topic. But one thing that was encouraging is that the Kashmiris now had an election which was legitimate. They elected their own government. But Kashmir could be the playground of the East. It could be the, you know, skiing center for people who want to ski in the Himalayas. And all you have to do is you have to have cooperation between the Kashmiris and the Pakistanis and the Indians, that, you know, this belongs to all of us, and Kashmiris, you take it, you do what you want to with it, and you know, if these countries start to build economic partnerships, this could be the resort of the world, and it would bring affluence and abundance to everyone.
So the money made that way, would that be directly in competition with the money that's made when we are warmongering? Would that be as much? Is that as much benefit, you think? Is
the
that why?
warmongering makes money for a very few people.
Right.
Okay, a handful of people. The peace-mongering will make money for a lot of people. You know, the word jihad originally means self-sacrifice and struggle to go beyond the ego to the universal domain. And so it's actually a good word which has been corrupted. And Muslim is such a beautiful word because it means to serve.
I think that's where the, you know, the moderate Muslim has also become an extremist, unfortunately, is because the original essence, the meaning of the word jihad means struggle against your own self, which is why they fast the 30 days.
Against your own limited self, yes.
Yeah, your own self, and allow for the higher self to emerge. But it has
and Muslim means to surrender to the universal,
completely.
to submit, yeah.
Absolutely. So, and that has gotten corrupted because there is a minority that has felt very abused in the process.
We need to revive the Sufi traditions
yes.
of Islam in a big way. You know, it's the feminine aspect of Islam that has not been seen by the West. Only recently, when you talk of Rumi or, you know,
I think it first
Hafiz
needs to be
people.
embraced by the mainstream Muslims themselves, you see. That's where that's at.
You know, if religion doesn't keep up with cosmology or evolution, it becomes irrelevant. And yet, of course, when people are unaware, that's all they resort to. And if you look at the origins of religion, they're based on an experience which was more universal, whether it was Muhammad or Buddha or Jesus.
And I think you're absolutely right. Earlier when you made that suggestion that we are at crossroads rather than, you know, at the threshold of a new reality per se, I think that we are at crossroads because we can either there are people who have completely resorted to becoming orthodoxical in their thinking about their religion because they feel harmed, they feel insecure, or we could go the other way, which is embrace cosmology and the oneness of the universe. But there is obviously, at this point, there is that element where, you know, people feel like it's been bubbling over for a while, and people feel that they need to go back to their roots and go back to who they are.
And the only thing that will, by the way, influence which way we go is the conversation in the media, the conversation in the world of education, entertainment, the conversation on the web, the conversation in cyberspace. So I think it's very important that we're having this conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.